Should you get AMD's RX 6700M or Nvidia's RTX 3060 graphics in your next gaming laptop? I've compared both in 17 games at 1080p and 1440p resolutions to find out the differences. Here are the differences in specs between these two laptop GPUs. The RTX 3060 has 6GB of GDDR6 memory, while the RX 6700M has quite a bit more at 10GB. But Nvidia's memory has more bandwidth and a larger memory bus. CUDA cores and stream processors aren't directly comparable, but the 6700M has a higher power limit, at least at maximum. AMD's spec sheet lists the 6700M as up to 135 watts, while Nvidia lists the 3060 as up to 115 watts. However, it can boost higher in certain scenarios with dynamic boost. AMD also shifts power between the CPU and GPU with Smart Shift, which is similar to Nvidia's dynamic boost. To do this testing, I'm using my Lenovo Legion 5 for the Nvidia GeForce RTX 3060 and MSI's Delta 15 for AMD's Radeon RX 6700M. Both laptops have 8-core Ryzen 7 5800H processors, and both were tested with the exact same physical kit of memory. 16GB of DDR4 3200 CL22 X8 single-rank memory in dual-channel. Unfortunately, I don't believe the Delta 15 has a full-powered RX 6700M. I measured it at about 120 watts in a GPU-only stress test, but then it quickly dipped to about 115, and with the CPU also loaded up, it was more like 95 watts. This makes sense given the Delta 15 is a thinner laptop design. More power equals more heat, so they have to have power limits. Now, while that doesn't sound ideal, at the same time, the Delta 15 is the only laptop I'm aware of that currently has the 6700M. So basically, this is the only way I can do this comparison at all, even if it may not be ideal. Both laptops were tested with an external screen connected to bypass the integrated graphics and get full performance. So let's compare both of these in 17 different games at 2 resolutions. Then afterwards, we'll check out pricing and availability, power draw, and content creator workloads. Let's start out with Red Dead Redemption 2, which was tested with the game's benchmark. I've got the 1080p results down the bottom and 1440p results at the top, with the RX 6700M results above the RTX 3060 results. The 6700M was reaching a 20% higher average frame rate at 1080p, increasing to a 23% lead at the higher 1440p resolution, the second biggest difference in favor of the 6700M out of all 17 games tested. This game recently added DLSS support, so I've tested that with the 3060 too. Unfortunately, there's no FSR support for this game as of yet, so the 6700M can't also get a further boost. Even with the advantage of DLSS, the 6700M still had a reasonable 11% lead at 1440p. Control is a game that tends to favor Nvidia graphics, and sure enough, the RTX 3060 was doing better at 1080p here. Granted, it's only 4 FPS ahead, but the 1% lows were 19% higher on the 3060, so a more stable experience. Things flip around at the higher 1440p resolution though, with the 6700M now having a 13% higher average frame rate. This game also has DLSS support though, which offers a massive gain to the RTX 3060. Again, unfortunately, there's no FSR support here either. Even the 1% lows on the 3060 are far ahead of the average FPS on the 6700M now. I've also tested both with ray tracing enabled to see the differences there. The 3060 could of course also use DLSS to get a further boost here, but I wanted to compare just pure RT differences. The 3060 was ahead at 1080p, but they're quite close at the higher 1440p resolution. Assassin's Creed Valhalla, on the other hand, is a game that tends to favor Radeon graphics, which probably explains why this one had an above average lead on the 6700M. At 1080p, the 6700M was reaching 19% higher average FPS. Though that said, above 60 FPS at the second highest preset isn't going to be unplayable or anything on the 3060. The gap closes a little at 1440p, with the 6700M now 15% ahead of the 3060 and very close to the magic 60 FPS. Watch Dogs Legion shows us what the 10GB of VRAM on the 6700M can do for us. This game had the biggest gain for the 6700M out of all 17 games tested. There was a warning when running the game's benchmark on the 3060, as 6GB wasn't enough. Of course, I'm running maxed out with ultra settings here, so lower setting presets would probably lower the gap, but the 6700M was reaching 1% lows that were higher than even the 3060's average FPS at both resolutions. Now, the 3060 can make use of DLSS to boost performance, but it's no match for the extra VRAM available to the 6700M, which is still ahead. Granted, I'm testing with DLSS set to quality, so if you're fine with sacrificing quality, you could probably further increase frame rate with a different DLSS option. The RTX 3060 was coming out ahead in Cyberpunk 2077 regardless of the resolution, though it's just a 2 to 3 FPS difference. Nothing major, but hey, winning's winning. This game also has DLSS support though, so the 3060 is able to get a substantial speed boost by turning this on. Again, like others, no FSR support available here right now. We're looking at a 41% higher average frame rate on the 3060 at 1080p and 59% higher at 1440p. The 6700M was back in front in Call of Duty Warzone, with a 10% higher average frame rate at 1080p and 12% higher at 1440p. Like most other games where the 6700M wins though, it's not as if the 3060 is offering terrible results. 87 FPS at max settings at the higher 1440p resolution was still playing fine for me. This is yet another game with DLSS support, and turning this on can give the RTX 3060 the win at both resolutions. We went from the 6700M having a 12% lead at 1440p prior to DLSS to the 3060 now having a 15% lead over the 6700M. Microsoft Flight Simulator was doing better with the 3060 graphics for the most part. The 6700M had a higher 1% low at 1080p, but the 3060 was a few frames ahead in terms of average FPS. The 1% lows are about the same at 1440p, but the 3060 had a 9% higher average frame rate here, or about 5 FPS. As an esports title, you could argue that higher frame rate is more important in Fortnite compared to most other games that I've covered. This one typically does better on Nvidia hardware, and that's the case here as the 3060 has its biggest lead over the 6700M out of all games at 1080p, though it's only like 6 FPS. The 3060 is still ahead at 1440p, but now it's less than a 2 FPS difference to the average frame rate. This game has DLSS support though, so it's possible to get some pretty big gains on the 3060 graphics. F1 2021 was tested with the highest setting preset, which enables some ray tracing effects by default, as denoted at the top of the graph. This could in part be why the 3060 was ahead, though the lead is small at 1080p with just a couple of FPS difference. The gap increases at 1440p, but the 6700M is still near 60 FPS here at max settings. Instead of talking through the rest of the 8 games individually in depth, I'll just blast through them so we can get into the average differences, as that's more interesting. Even if all of this testing did take many hours to complete, a larger selection of games is important to help get a better rounded average. Feel free to pause the video if you want a closer look at these additional games. On average, over all 17 games tested at 1080p, AMD's Radeon RX 6700M was reaching about 7% higher average FPS when compared to Nvidia's GeForce RTX 3060. The 3060 was still faster in 7 of the games listed at the bottom of the graph, but worst case it's only a 5% difference. The 6700M was ahead in the other 10 titles with bigger differences, with the biggest difference noted in Watch Dogs Legion due to the 6 gigs of VRAM in the 3060 being a limit in this test. Stepping up to the higher 1440p resolution, and the 6700M still had a 7% lead over the 3060. However, the 3060 was now only ahead in 5 games compared to the 7 at the lower 1080p resolution, though some of the games the 3060 was doing better in had higher margins at this higher resolution. In most cases though, the 6700M was ahead, but apart from the VRAM limit in Watch Dogs Legion at max settings, the 6 gigs on the 3060 seems alright at 1440p. If we instead consider that game as an outlier, then the 6700M still has a 4% lead on average out of the other 16 games. I've also compared the 6 games that offer DLSS to see how that helps within supported titles. We'll just look at 1440p as I think this is where DLSS can offer a practical benefit. Most games run nicely at 1080p without it. The 6700M was 12% slower when compared to the 3060 with DLSS enabled, though this is only an average of 6 games, and we can see results vary significantly depending on the specific title. The DLSS results could be boosted further in most games as I chose to test with quality settings where possible. Now, you might be asking where the FSR results are. Fact is, these 17 games are what I've been testing for months now, years in cases of some of them, but FSR just isn't available in any of them yet. FSR is still relatively new, and it's only made an appearance in some newer games. Now, no offense to anyone that plays them, but they're not titles that I've heard of, at least compared to the more popular games that we just ran through. Should I have picked some arbitrary games that do have FSR support and tested them on both laptops? Maybe, but I don't think so. I didn't pick any of these games just because they had DLSS. In many cases, DLSS was added after the fact, like in Red Dead Redemption 2. I just chose to include some DLSS results because that's actually supported in some of the games that I test. It's just a legitimate advantage that the RTX 3060 graphics has at the moment, because a lot of games support DLSS whether or not you like it. Hopefully we can get some more popular games that support FSR in the future. As for the VRAM differences, for the most part, the 6 gigs in the 3060 generally seems to be enough at both 1080p and 1440p resolutions, though this was not always the case. The one exception seems to be Watch Dogs Legion, where the RX 6700M had huge gains due to the extra VRAM capacity. This could be an indication of what to expect years from now, as presumably in future more demanding games at high resolutions will use more VRAM. It's hard to predict, but yeah, perhaps over time I would expect the RX 6700M to get an even bigger lead over the 3060 due to this difference. But at the same time, I don't think the RTX 3060 is suddenly going to become unplayable or anything. Fact is, I think it's the best sweet spot on the Nvidia side today. Personally, I wouldn't be making the purchasing decision purely based on the VRAM count. We've just got no idea how things are going to look in future. Maybe by the time the VRAM difference starts becoming more major, you might be looking at a laptop upgrade anyway. Just before we get into the price differences, I've also compared both laptops in some content creator workloads, and we'll look at the power draw difference. SPECviewperf tests out various professional 3D workloads, and the 3060, shown by the purple bars, was still able to come out ahead in a number of tests. But the 6700M also had some pretty big leads. It just depends on the specific test. I've compared the total system power draw from the wall with both laptops running Control at 4K max settings with an external screen. The 6700M laptop was drawing 34% more power, and it was about 13% ahead in terms of average FPS. So there may be an argument for Nvidia being more power efficient, but this game usually performs better with Nvidia graphics, so without measuring power draw in every single game, I can't really say for sure. Alright, so generally speaking, the RX 6700M was beating the RTX 3060 in most cases. Honestly, this wasn't too surprising, given even AMD seemed to be comparing the 3060 with the 6600M, but I'm still waiting to get that laptop in for testing. But once it's here, I definitely will compare it to the 3060 as well, so make sure you're subscribed for that one. I only decided to make this comparison because when I compared the 6700M against the 3070 was ahead, and yeah, it seems like these two are much closer together than that. That said though, as mentioned, the 3060 does of course have the advantage of DLSS, which is present in a number of popular games, and in many cases that does give it the edge over the 6700M. Both of these laptops ran modern games at high settings, even at the higher 1440p resolution without any problems. None of the games tested crashed on either laptop or anything like that, so driver stability seemed fine. So then what about price difference? Prices of both will of course change over time, so refer to those links in the description below for updates. At the time of recording, MSI's Delta 15, the only gaming laptop currently available with RX 6700M graphics, goes for $1,600 in the US. Granted, this is currently on sale. Right now, the Lenovo Legion 5 I've tested with RTX 3060 graphics is around $1,550, so a little cheaper. But I have seen it for sale for closer to $1,400, which would make it much more attractive from a price to performance perspective. Honestly, if the 3060 laptop is around $100 to $200 less than the 6700M, I'd probably just get the 3060. In many cases, the performance difference isn't that great, and you do get DLSS support. That said, if the price difference is closer, the 6700M might be worth it. Generally, it does perform better, it has more VRAM, and FSR might be more useful in future. But those last 2 points are related to the future, and I don't really recommend buying based on future promises. Of course, there's way more to consider when buying a new laptop other than just the GPU performance. So check out my full review of the MSI Delta 15 over here next to get all the details about it. I've covered everything else like thermals, battery life, and more. Or check this comparison next to see if you should instead consider the RTX 3070 over the RX 6700M. Make sure you're subscribed to the channel for more upcoming laptop comparisons like this one, and come and join me in the community in Discord and get behind the scenes videos by supporting the channel on Patreon.